9 years ago, I stood in my parents' living room with my husband's hand wrapped tightly around mine, trying to understand how the people who had raised me could look at the man I loved and see only the color of his skin. My mother was crying, my father was furious. My older brother wouldn't even look at me. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Dad said. Mom's voice was quieter, but somehow her words hurt even more. "If you marry him, don't expect us to be part of your life." I looked at the man beside me. His name was Daniel. He was patient, kind, hardworking, and the first person who had ever made me feel completely safe being myself. I had hoped my family would eventually accept him. Instead, they gave me a choice. Them or him. I chose Daniel. That night, my father told me I was no longer welcome in their home. My mother hugged me for less than 5 seconds before pulling away, as if even touching me was somehow painful. I walked out with one suitcase, tears running down my face and Daniel beside me. We had no idea what the next 9 years would bring. The beginning was difficult. We rented a tiny apartment where the kitchen was so small that 2 people could barely stand in it. Daniel worked long shifts while I took whatever work I could find. There were days when we had to carefully count every dollar. But there was something we had that money couldn't buy. We had each other. Daniel never complained about my family. He never told me to hate them. Whenever I cried because I missed my mother, he simply held me and said, "You don't have to stop loving them just because they stopped loving us." Those words stayed with me over the years. Our lives slowly changed. Daniel started his own small business. At first, it was nothing impressive. Just a few clients and an old laptop on our dining table. But he was determined. He worked late nights. I helped with paperwork, answered emails, and encouraged him whenever things went wrong. Eventually, the business grew. Then it grew again 5 years after our wedding. We moved into a beautiful home. 7 years later, Daniel's company had become extremely successful. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were thriving. And yet, despite everything we had accomplished, there was still a small part of me that wondered about my parents. I sometimes searched their names online. I wondered if they were healthy. I wondered whether Mom ever missed me. I wondered if Dad regretted what he had done. But I never contacted them. I was afraid that opening that door would destroy the peace I had worked so hard to build. Then 9 years after the day they disowned me, someone knocked on our front door. It was my mother. I froze when I saw her standing there. She looked older. Her hair had turned gray around the edges, and there were deep lines around her eyes that I didn't remember. For a moment, neither of us spoke, then she smiled. "Can I come in?" My heart was pounding. I stepped aside. She walked into our home and looked around. Her eyes became wide when she saw the house. "This is yours." I nodded. "Daniel, and I bought it." She stared at the expensive furniture, the photographs on the walls, and the awards displayed in the hallway. Then she asked the question that immediately changed the atmosphere. "Where is Daniel at work?" She nodded. Then she sat down. I sat across from her, waiting for an explanation. Instead, she said, "Your father and I need your help." I almost laughed. 9 years without a birthday call. 9 Christmases without a message, 9 years of silence. And her first words were about needing help with what I asked. She began explaining that my father's business had collapsed. They had debts. Their house was in danger of being sold. My brother had his own problems and couldn't help. Then Mom looked directly into my eyes. "We need money." I felt something inside me break, not because she asked, because she acted as though the last 9 years had never happened. I asked her why she had come to me after everything. She lowered her eyes. "Because you're our daughter." I shook my head. "You stopped being my mother 9 years ago." She immediately started crying. I made a mistake. I wanted to believe her more than anything. I wanted to hear those words. But then she said something that made me realize why she had really come. "Your father thinks Daniel owes us an apology too." I stared at her in disbelief. "An apology?" She nodded. "For taking you away from the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Daniel had never taken me anywhere. I had chosen him. My mother had simply never accepted that. Then she made another request. She wanted Daniel to give my father a large amount of money to save the family home. I stood up. Mom, you didn't come here because you missed me. She didn't answer. You came because you heard we were successful. Her silence was the answer. I walked to the window and looked outside. For years I had imagined this moment. I imagined my mother apologizing. I imagined running into her arms. I imagined telling her about everything she had missed. But reality was different. She wasn't here because she finally understood what she had done. She was here because she needed something. Daniel came home about an hour later. When he saw my mother sitting in the living room, he immediately understood that something was wrong. I told him everything. He listened quietly. Then he looked at my mother. You don't owe me an apology because I'm black, he said calmly. You owe your daughter an apology because you abandoned her. My mother's face turned red. She started crying again. I was wrong, she whispered. Daniel nodded. Yes, you were. There was no anger in his voice. That somehow made it more powerful. My mother looked at me. I know I can't undo the past. No, I said you can't, but I want another chance. I sat down. For the first time, I allowed myself to say everything I had kept inside for 9 years. I told her about the nights I cried, the birthdays she missed, the times I wondered whether she was alive, the day I got sick and wished I could call her, the moments when I achieved something and instinctively wanted to tell her before remembering that we no longer spoke. She listened, and for once she didn't defend herself. She simply cried. I didn't give her the money. Not that day. I told her that forgiveness and financial responsibility were two different things. If she truly wanted to rebuild our relationship, she needed to do it without expecting anything from me. She nodded. Then she left. Weeks passed. Then months. She started sending letters. Not asking for money, not asking for favors, just letters. She told me about her regrets. She admitted that she had allowed prejudice and fear to control her. She apologized to Daniel. She apologized for every cruel word my father had spoken. My father took longer, but eventually he sent his own letter. He didn't ask for money. He simply wrote, I was wrong about Daniel. More importantly, I was wrong about my daughter. It wasn't enough to erase 9 years, but it was a beginning. Today, my relationship with my family is complicated. There are still wounds. There are still things we don't talk about. But my mother and I speak regularly. She has met Daniel again. And slowly, carefully, we're building something that should have existed from the beginning. I learned something during those 9 years. Sometimes the people who abandon you expect you to remain broken. Without them, they don't expect you to heal. They don't expect you to build a beautiful life, and they certainly don't expect you to become someone they need. But your success shouldn't be about proving them wrong. It should be about proving to yourself that their rejection never determined your worth. I didn't lose my family when they rejected Daniel. I lost the illusion that their love was unconditional. And in losing that illusion, I discovered something much more valuable. A husband who stood beside me when everyone else walked away. A life built on love rather than prejudice. And the courage to forgive without forgetting. 9 years after my family disowned me, my mother came back with demands. She left with something she never expected. The truth, and for the first time in 9 years, she finally understood that love cannot be demanded. It has to be earned,